Mark, good morning. Obviously, the market somewhat blindsided by the impact of these ad targeting changes and maybe some of the commentary Snap made about just, ad demand in general in this environment. So how do you put it into context in terms of how the stock is valued right now for growth looking ahead?
Yeah, good morning. The stock was certainly priced to perfection, and this wasn't a perfect quarter. I think in a lot of ways it was good, but obviously there's when you're telling the street you're going to grow revenues at 50% per year for the next 3 years, and you're guiding towards 30% next quarter, there's certainly going to be some questions and a bit of a sell-off. I think what's important here is there's really the two factors that are driving it. The first is, supply chain constraints, which I think was already somewhat known. And then the IDFA issues. And I think the IDFA issues tied to Apple's privacy changes really caught them off guard. I think they trusted Apple that the SCAD network, which was Apple's alternative to measure kind of mobile app installs, was going to work effectively. And the answer is that it's not. It's insufficient for advertiser needs. And it's going to take time for them to work through and figure out, alternative workarounds for attribution and measurement of those ads. And so I think, we went through this hype cycle tied to IDFA when Apple first announced the changes last year. That for 6 months, nobody talked about it. Now we're talking about it again. And I think what we're realizing is it is having an impact. And certainly it caught Snap off guard, and I think it caught investors off guard as well.
You say that, companies will work around it. Obviously, Facebook down 5% this morning. It has been somewhat of a shadow over that story as well. But even if they do, find these workarounds, does it restrain average revenue per user or some of these other metrics that the stock valuation is based on?
Yeah, it shouldn't. I think management came out on the call last night and said that it was transitory. I tend to believe them. The issues right now seem very centered around measurement and not about targeting, which I think is very important because, if targeting is broken, that's really difficult to replicate for the advertiser to effectively find their audience. But for measurement, you can go off and find workarounds. And we know that Facebook's been further along that path. They introduced their conversion API, their aggregate events manager. And in their blog post, I think about a month or so ago, they've effectively come up with an estimation of how effective the ads are, and they said they were underreporting it by about 15%. So the issue is known, and they're working towards effectively, building out these workarounds, and it just takes time. You've got to go advertiser by advertiser, get them to onboard through the new tools and services that you have. It takes a lot of integration, a lot of, human power to effectively go off and do that. But we're seeing that take place. And so in my view, this is something that's going to, weigh on the industry probably for the next 6 to 9 months. I think we're pretty much at peak IDFA issue right now. But as we go through next year, we should come out of it.
Mark, if I heard you correctly, you mentioned that the supply chain headwinds were largely expected or known coming into this. How does that speak to the mix of advertisers on Snap, and does that carry through in terms of what we might hear from their competitors like Facebook or Alphabet or Twitter next week?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, one of the more interesting points that we got from Snapchat last night was, if you just look at sequential ad spend, their performance marketing was flat quarter over quarter, which would imply that brand spend was growing somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25%. So brand spend feels a little bit more insulated. And so if you look at the platforms like Twitter, like Google's YouTube, they may be a little bit more insulated from some of these trends taking place and pressures. Now, what we know with supply chain issues is that if an advertiser has nothing to sell, they don't want to spend any money to advertise. We know this certainly applies to performance marketing. Does it apply as much to brand? The answer is partially, and I think that's something that Snap alluded to. So it's something that I'm watching to see some of those more brand-dominant platforms like Twitter, like Google's YouTube, describe what impacts they're forecasting as it relates to that brand spend component. As far as the IDFA issues are concerned, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark. Finish that thought.
Yeah, so as far as the IDFA issues are concerned, again, it feels like Google's quite insulated because, for the most part, they advertise on Android. And so anything tied to iOS, if anything, you see advertisers taking money off of Apple's iOS and putting it to work on Android. So across both areas, Google may be the one that looks the most insulated across the sector. But certainly, other advertisers like Facebook that have a lot of similar exposure, like Pinterest, you should certainly see some of those headwinds persist. And I think that's why you're seeing those stocks move in the direction that they are.